Your loan may be flagged as potentially fraudulent because there's various factors at play here, various signals that they're looking for. Suspicious phone numbers, suspicious addresses, COVID EIDL advances, suspicious email address, who's paying on time, who hasn't paid yet, and if you haven't paid, they're going to look into this and see, hey, was this potential fraud? Nearly 1/3 of all COVID EIDL loans have been flagged as potential fraud. This is a bombshell new report from the Office of Inspector General and the SBA. If you're a U.S. taxpayer, a U.S. citizen, an EIDL borrower, or a small business, this is a must-watch video. As predicted, previous reports were just the tip of the iceberg. So here we go. I'm going to share the new magnitude of EIDL and PPP fraud, what that means for you as an EIDL borrower, how they are classifying potential fraud, some small things you may not expect, and if you're a small business owner looking for funding, what are some of the best options right now? I'll go into those. I'll go into how you can lower EIDL payments, and I'll answer the question, will EIDL loans be forgiven? And by the way, if you want to lower EIDL payments and you haven't yet, you can apply for EIDL hardship accommodation. Here are some details, and I'll leave a link with information in the description. And of course, if you want funding, grants, loans for your business, check out the Skip app. We're proud to be the #1 app for small business funding in the US. Helloskip.com/app. Search Skip in the app stores or use the link in the description. Let me run through some of the key findings. The OIG estimates that $200 billion in potentially fraudulent COVID EIDLs, EIDL targeted advances, those were the grants, supplemental targeted advances, that was up to $15,000, and PPP loans, those were the forgivable loans. This means that at least 17% of all COVID EIDL and PPP funds were potentially fraudulent actors. That doesn't mean they were fraud. I'll go into what potential means and what the investigative process is. Your loan may be flagged as potentially fraudulent because there's various factors at play here, various signals that they're looking for. But let me talk about what's happened today. We know there's a fraud. It's just a question of how much they're investigating. They have 10 years to investigate. That's a new rule. OIG's oversight has resulted in 1,011 indictments, 803 arrests, and 529 convictions related to these programs. You know, there are around 20 million folks who received funding from these programs. So we're talking about only 500 convictions to date. You got to imagine there's going to be hundreds, if not thousands of more convictions in the coming months and years. Some good news is that nearly 30 billion in COVID EIDL and PPP funds has been seized or returned to the SBA. OIG right now is working on tens of thousands of investigative leads on alleged fraud, waste, and abuse of taxpayer resources. First, the biggest problem that led to all this fraud was, of course, in April, May, and June 2020, how quickly the SBA decided to deliver EIDL relief, PPP relief. The SBA did not have the control and processes in place to catch a lot of this fraud. Of course, as I've talked about in lots of videos, there were some very simple things they could have done to prevent the vast majority of this fraud. One note here is the SBA executed on over 14 years worth of lending in just 14 days. 2 weeks getting out billions of dollars was the equivalent of 14 years of the SBA prior to the pandemic. The changes the SBA made moving into 2021 were many. Here's some of them: requiring tax transcripts for COVID EIDL borrowers, flagging certain EIN prefixes, requiring loan officer reviews, and a whole bunch more. But let me get into why this potentially fraudulent number has ballooned so much. Here's the TLDR. This $200 billion estimate represents approximately 17% of all dispersed COVID EIDL and PPP funds. Specifically, more than $136 billion in potential fraud for COVID EIDL and $64 billion for PPP funds. Here's how that looks in a diagram. And for the first time, we're seeing what all of the fraud indicators are. They're looking at hold codes, IP addresses, EIN numbers, bank accounts, if you've defaulted, hotline complaints, sole proprietors, independent contractors, they're scrutinizing you more, suspicious phone numbers, suspicious addresses, COVID EIDL advances, suspicious email address. In fact, here's the summary of potentially fraudulent COVID EIDLs by fraud indicator. For example, from IP addresses that have been flagged, typically international IP addresses, but not always. $55 billion falls into that bucket. When we look at sole props and independent contractors, that's $5 billion. Suspicious email addresses, such as slight variations on Gmail, for example, that's 1 billion that's been flagged. 2.2 billion on EIDL advances. Remember, there's only about $20 billion for EIDL advances, so 10% of that program has been flagged as potential fraud. Similar distribution among the PPP loans, and for the first time, they've shared how a case typically advances. Here is a web where they initially prosecuted one case, and related to that case in blue, they found 62 other cases of PPP loan fraud, and related to that, they found in orange 101 cases related to potential EIDL loan fraud. Again, just want to emphasize the $200 billion is potential. This is what they have the next 8 or 9 years to investigate and prosecute, and you bet they will. They're going to try to get through as many as they can because this is a lot of taxpayer dollars. They give a lot of examples of how they're flagging things, including kickback schemes, sole proprietors doing things they shouldn't be doing. You might be surprised by some of these. Suspicious phone numbers and physical addresses. In fact, the SBA, in their response to this report, did point out that some of these suspicious and flagged behaviors are legitimate, such as email addresses. There may be a reason why you put down an email address. You are afraid of spam, you entered it incorrectly. So a lot of this will be cleared. They'll find out, hey, maybe it's not fraud, maybe this is legitimate, but it's all being investigated. This is a huge deal. And one more indicator here of loan fraud is non-payment when a payment is due. And most EIDL loans have become due. So now what they've done in this report is look back, hey, who's paying on time, who hasn't paid yet, and if you haven't paid, they're going to look into this and see, hey, was this potential fraud? Of course, if you're having trouble paying, and a lot of businesses are still struggling because of the macroeconomy, rising interest rates, rising inflation, many businesses that we talk to still aren't back to where they are pre-pandemic, or many are trying new ventures and new businesses. You can lower your EIDL payments, as I mentioned, link in the description. Will these EIDL loans be forgiven? Well, first, let me say there are other good funding options out there. EIDL was the best, no doubt about it. Moment in time for the pandemic, for what the world was going through. There are lots of other private lenders, public options. If you want to see a list of some of them, go look in the description. We've got line of credit partners, term loan partners with loans you can get from 6 months up to 5 years. And of course, lots of good grant options. And we just launched our brand new Grants Vault on the Skip app to help you quickly apply for grants. If you are serious about grants, 1K, 5K, 25K, 50K grants. We've got all of those options up on the Skip app right now. Go check out the Grants Vault and help you apply more effectively and quicker for grant opportunities. And as for EIDL loan forgiveness, no, I do not think it will happen. Not now, not in the future. So make sure you're in a position to pay back your EIDL loans. So that's the new report. I'll link to the report in the description as well if you want to see some more examples. Most importantly, thanks for subscribing. Stay well, stay healthy, and I'll see you in the next video.